Fanatics. Yeah, here we are again with a true crime story time. So, for those of you who are new, hello, welcome. I am Cindy, and today we're going to be talking about a despicable human being. I did say on the last episode that I would bring it a little bit closer to home this week. I live in England, so we are going to be talking about the Camden Ripper. But if you like true crime and you like all things diamond painting, please feel free to hit that subscribe button to my channel, not to miss out on future episodes. There is also the notification bell. And I've got back into my true crime in a big way. I did take a big chunk of time out, and all my friends and fanatics were like, Cindy, we miss your true crime. I'm like, okay. So here we are. So along with true crime, I also go live on Mondays, where we get to hang out, we work on our projects together, we have a chit chat, I do my giveaways, and you also see the new releases upcoming in my store, and so much more. There's a whole lot going on, and it's an exciting time. I do own my own diamond painting company, and I would love for you to take a look. The link is in the description box, just to see if anything jumps out at you. I do ship worldwide at no extra cost. I currently can get them stateside and beyond in around 15 days. It's kind of the average, give or take a day or two. My orders go in every single Friday, but by Wednesday you will all have your tracking numbers. They'll all be on their way to you. Anyway, we're not here about my business today. We are here to talk about a depraved individual. Thank you, guys. A big thank you, because I had untold messages from my friends and fanatics. We miss your true crime. I did take a chunk of time out. I just kind of needed to. When you do true crime, you go into very dark places. You do a lot of research. Then you start thinking, why is the postman coming towards me? It gets that way. So you do need to sometimes just take a step out of that world. Now, as much as we all love true crime, we do love true crime, I am very aware that people lost their lives, and it's very sad. I think the biggest draw for us in the true crime world is how someone can just be that awful and be that depraved. We grab your project. Now then, I am working on a kit that is not released yet. This is a very special kit to me, so it's not released. I am working on it to release it. I don't know when. It is a 60 by 60, so give or take a week or two, it will be out for release. All on its own, I think, is where I'm going to go with this one. But I've zoomed in close so you can't see the image or anything, so please do forgive that. But you hopefully are diamond painting or cleaning or doing your chores while listening to this episode. So a massive thank you for joining me. I really do appreciate it. And let's get into today's episode. So today we are talking about the Camden Ripper. His name is Tony Hardy, and I always like to start off in the background, kind of what what happened to make them do what they done? Right. So, born in 1952, Tony Hardy was raised in a lower middle-class family with his 4 siblings. His father had spent his life working in the mines of Staffordshire in England, and Tony was expected to do the same. At an early age, Tony knew he was different. He knew he was destined for greatness and had a deep, burning desire to make much more of himself than just a lowly labourer like his dad. Tony started off on the right foot. He knew that he would need to study hard if he wanted to make a better life for himself. He buried his nose in books, excelled in school, and by his late teens was admitted to the Imperial College, London. It was an elite school located just around the corner from Kensington Palace and the Royal Albert Hall in the centre of London, and it's still considered one of the top universities in the world. While attending college, Tony realised he was smarter than most of the other students, much smarter. He believed that there were very few people that could match his intellect, and certainly not the police. However, he did meet a girl he thought matched his intellect. Her name was Judith Dwight, and she worked as a secretary at the school. And in 1972, they were married and immediately started a family, eventually having 2 girls and 2 boys. While living in London, only a few miles from Whitechapel. Now, if you're a true crime fanatic, you'll know what happened in Whitechapel. There was another ripper roaming them parts many years ago called Jack. And it turns out I'm not the only one that knows that. Tony knew that too. So Tony developed a fascination with the stories of Jack the Ripper, reading every book he could possibly find about the notorious killer. Jack the Ripper was believed to be responsible for 11 heinous murders of prostitutes in the late 1800s in Whitechapel and was never caught. I mean, to be fair, they didn't have the technology that we have now. Tony admired his ability to evade police and often thought Jack the Ripper must have been extremely intelligent as well. His close friend Maureen Reeve later recounted his obsession with Jack the Ripper. Quote, Anthony was obsessed with serial killers and we talked about them on several occasions. We had long discussions about Jack the Ripper and Anthony thought he had a brilliant mind. He reckoned Jack the Ripper was a very clever bloke because he murdered all those prostitutes and never got caught. I never thought anything of it. End quote. Now, just a side note here. You're all here because you're into true crime. I'm here because I'm into true crime. Doesn't necessarily mean we're all doing research into things, heinous acts. It's not necessarily that. There's no shame in being obsessed with serial killers, and I think a lot of people who have committed heinous acts are into true crime as well. Yeah, you see where I'm going? There's 2 different types of people that are into true crime. So, after graduation, Tony landed a high-paying job with British Sugar, one of the largest food manufacturers at the time. Working as a mechanical engineer, he excelled at his work and quickly moved up the corporate ranks. For a time, Tony and Judith had a normal, happy marriage. They had their kids, but Tony decided he needed more. He had an obsession with sadism and violent sex, and that was something Judith couldn't provide for him. His extreme fetish led him to have affairs, but he eventually realised that it was much easier just to hire prostitutes. In the mid-70s, the UK had a severe economic downturn, and Tony lost his high-paying job. This was a severe blow to his already inflated ego. In his mind, someone of his superior intellect just didn't lose their job. This loss was hard on him, and he fell into a deep depression, suffering from severe mood swings and violent outbursts. Psychiatrists diagnosed him as bipolar and put him on medication, but his mental illness would dominate his life from that point forward. By the late 70s, Tony got a new high-paying engineering job in Tasmania, Australia. This was exciting for him and his family, but it didn't solve any of their problems. Now, in his late 20s, he was still suffering with this disorder, as well as his desire for more and more violent sex. In 1982, the economy was in a recession, and Tony was let go from his job once again due to job cuts. This news ignited anger, and he began to unleash his violent behaviour on his wife and his kids. At the height of his depression, but still knowing he was much more intelligent than law enforcement, Tony believed he could commit the perfect crime. He wanted to get rid of his wife, but didn't want to go through the hassle of a divorce. He filled a 2-litre plastic bottle with water. He put it in the freezer and let it turn into a solid block of ice. He then took the rock-hard piece of ice and beat his wife over the head with it while she slept. Tony believed it would be the perfect weapon. Once thawed, the murder weapon would completely disappear. But murder was a lot more difficult than he expected. He planned on beating her unconscious and drowning her in the tub to make it look like she slipped in the tub, hit her head and drowned. But he didn't count on her staying conscious. Not only did she stay conscious, she fought back. Tony only stopped when one of his children came into the room and started screaming. Police arrested Tony, but domestic violence was looked upon differently in the 80s. Despite openly admitting that he was trying to kill his wife in Tasmania, the offence was not considered attempted murder, but a domestic abuse issue. Regardless, the offence still required a jail sentence. Tony convinced authorities that because of his mental illness, he should be locked up in a mental hospital rather than a jail. He later told friends that it was all an act to avoid a jail term. While in the psych unit in Queensland, Tony played the game and cooperated with the hospital authorities and was eventually released. When Tony was released from the psychiatric hospital, he was deported back to the UK. He had attempted to kill his wife, but was now a free man, which reinforced his belief that he could outwit anyone, just like Jack the Ripper. His wife and kids had already moved back to the UK, and Judith had now filed for divorce. This infuriated him. Tony had gone from a well-paid executive to a homeless alcoholic sleeping in various hostels throughout the London area. He was obsessed with his now ex-wife and stalked her, even planting microphones in her home so he could listen to her conversations. Judith pleaded with police that her ex-husband was endangering the lives of herself and her children, and she was granted a restraining order. But a piece of paper didn't stop Tony. He quickly broke the restraining order, which landed him with a short prison sentence. After Tony was released from prison, he moved to the Camden area of London so he could be near King's Cross Station. The King's Cross area was known throughout the 90s as the red light district of London, with plenty of pimps, pushers and prostitutes. Tony frequently hired prostitutes from the streets of King's Cross, looking for vulnerable women to satisfy his deviant sexual needs. He was known among the regular girls in the area for his need of violent sex as well as his stench. Tony rarely bathed or changed his clothes. In 1998, a sex worker accused him of rape, claiming he was trying to kill her. Unfortunately for the girl, rape is hard to prove when the claim comes from a prostitute that's being paid for sex. Her claims were ignored by police, and Tony once again evaded arrest. Throughout his life, he had been in a constant downward spiral. He still believed himself to be invincible. Tony was known by his neighbours as the local nutcase. His neighbours knew he would often bring prostitutes to his home, and they were aware of his addictions and mental issues. They were also aware of his obsession with Jack the Ripper. Tony would constantly talk about him, but for the most part, his neighbours thought he was just annoying, strange, and a bit mentally ill, but overall harmless. None of them imagined he would be capable of murder. In January 2002, Tony had a dispute with his upstairs neighbour. He claimed that her shower was leaking water into his flat, but she refused to do anything about it. Tony took the matters into his own hands. While the woman was away from her home, he painted on her front door. At the bottom, he signed it with the letter T. He then poured battery acid through the mail slot in the door, spilling it all over the door and the ground outside. As he left the scene, Tony stepped in the battery acid. It didn't take much for police to find him. With all that intellect and stuff, They simply followed the footprints straight to Tony's door. When police confronted him, Tony invited them into his home. He was nonchalant and unapologetic. He freely admitted that he had graffitied her door and poured the battery acid, so police arrested him for vandalism. As the officers looked around his cluttered, unkept apartment, they noticed a locked bedroom door and asked him to open it. Tony claimed that he couldn't, and that the door to his roommate's bedroom, and he didn't have a key. His roommate, 31-year-old Sally Rose White, was developmentally challenged. Young woman with a history of running away from home. She was working as a prostitute in the King's Cross area to pay for her crack cocaine addiction. As police were taking Tony into custody, they told him to grab his coat. Before allowing him to put on the coat, police searched the pockets and realised Tony had lied to them. Inside his coat pocket, they found the key to the locked room. I mean, he's really proving his intellect here, isn't he? When police opened the bedroom door, they were shocked to find the naked body of a deceased woman lying on the bed. It was his roommate, Sally Rose White. There was damage to the top of her head, blood on the sheets, and on the floor was a hoodie with a large blood stain inside the hood. The trail of blood was on the wall at the head of the bed, as if her head had slid down the wall. Her face was covered with a cloth, and there was a bite mark on her right thigh. Sally's body had been posed near a rubber Satan mask, several crucifixes, and a single black high-heeled shoe. A dildo was found inserted. Photo equipment was set up around the bed as if in preparation for a photo shoot. Near the door was a bucket of soapy water with a sponge. The water in the bucket was still warm. In Tony's living room, police found 3 televisions and several stacks of VHS porn tapes, totaling over 70, mostly of sadistic porn that depicted simulated rape. Tony denied knowing anything about Sally's body and why it was there, but it was clear to the police what had happened, and they arrested Tony on suspicion of murder. After his arrest, Freddie Patel, an experienced pathologist, performed the post-mortem examination. To the frustration of police, Patel found that Sally Rose White had died of congestional heart failure, not from the wound on the top of her head. Despite the wound on her head, the blood trailed down the wall. The blood-soaked hoodie that had been removed after death, the positioning of the body with a satanic mask, the insertion of a dildo, the photographic equipment, her head being covered, the bucket of warm soapy water. The pathologist still insisted that no crime had been committed. Investigators demanded that Patel re-examine her, but even after he had performed a second post-mortem examination, Patel insisted she died of natural causes. This infuriated investigators, but they had no choice. If the pathologist said there was no murder, there was nothing to investigate. They had to drop the charges. They charged Tony for the vandalism, but again, he convinced authorities that his mental health was to blame, and he spent a time in hospital rather than jail. Tony was sectioned under the Mental Health Act to St Luke's Hospital near Camden. Again, he cooperated with doctors and psychiatrists, but didn't let them know of his true sick desires. During his stay in the hospital, Tony's psychiatrist wrote 6 warnings that he was vulnerable to relapse, posed a high risk of violence, and that women and prostitutes were at a particular risk. Doctors wrote that Tony had a personality disorder that had not been treated, claiming, and I quote, "There is strong evidence of risk of reoffending, and he is likely to cause others serious physical or psychological harm." End quote. Despite the warnings, in November 2002, after only 11 months in hospital, a panel of 3 released him. The panel argued that Tony was, quote, mentally ill, but had a natural human right to be treated in the surroundings which all encourage and support his own efforts, end quote. Additionally, the Mental Health Trust didn't alert the police or his neighbours of his release. He was once again a free man, reinforcing his belief that he was invincible. During his stay in the mental hospital, Tony had become even more obsessed with drugs, alcohol, porn, and prostitutes. His behaviour after his release became increasingly strange. He began writing letters to prostitutes asking for dominant sex, claiming he was independently wealthy and looking for a, quote, special relationship. He was also known to take photos of women in Camden bars and would lick the leather off sofas and chairs where the women had been sitting. In late December, he walked into a church and asked members to pray for his immoral soul. But most disturbing of all, he had an overwhelming need to emulate his hero, Jack the Ripper. Elizabeth Valad was a stunning brunette with a half-Iranian background. While in her early teens, Elizabeth started hanging around with the wrong crowd, and by the time she was 16, she had dropped out of school and moved to London. She often told her mother she was working as a secretary, but in today's terms, she would be known as a, quote, sugar baby. Elizabeth met a multi-millionaire in his 70s who kept an upscale flat for her in Chelsea, one of the most expensive areas of London. For 10 years, she lived off the generosity of her benefactor, often referring to him as her, quote, meal ticket. He supplied her with designer clothes, a new Mercedes, and they often dined together at the Ritz-Carlton. By 2001, however, Elizabeth was 29 years old and her meal ticket had run out. She was now on her own, and it wasn't long before she became addicted to drugs and resorted to street prostitution in the King's Cross area. Just before Christmas 2002, Elizabeth took to the streets of London and was never seen alive again. On December the 30th, 2002, at about 3 a.m, a homeless man was rummaging through a dumpster behind a pub in Camden, where he felt something cold and slimy inside a plastic garbage bag. He described it as feeling like 2 fillets of salmon. When he opened the bag, it took him a minute to realise what he was looking at. What he felt were the calf muscles from 2 female lower legs. Someone had sawed off the legs at the knees. When police arrived, they found a second garbage bag in the same dumpster containing a partial female torso. Investigators taped off the area behind the pub and began searching the rest of the dumpsters in the immediate area, but no more body parts were found. At dawn, they began searching the dumpsters and drains of the entire surrounding area. After searching for almost 3 days, in another dumpster less than 100 yards away, they found more green garbage bags with female body parts, plus another partial torso, a right arm, a left arm, a foot, and a blood-stained bra. This second location served as the dumpster of the building where Anthony Hardy lived. As the days went by, police widened their search around Camden and continued to find more garbage bags with more body parts. The Regent's Canal was also nearby. That was where the body of Paula Fields had been found the prior year. That was linked to the canal killer. From the parts they had found, they knew there were 2 female victims, but the heads and hands of both were still missing. Police arranged scuba teams to dredge the canals looking for more parts, but found nothing. There was also the possibility that trash collectors may have already picked up some parts from the dumpsters and taken them to landfill. A team of 80 officers would spend the next 3 weeks searching through endless tons of rubbish at the landfill, but again found nothing. It was only a matter of time before police realised that some of the body parts that were found at the same building, they found a dead body less than a year prior. Tony Hardy immediately became a suspect. Not only a suspect, but suspect number 1. It had only been 7 weeks since they had released Tony from the mental hospital. Police brought a large team of officers to Tony's flat, intending to break the door down, but there was no need. The door was slightly open and they simply walked in, but there was no sign of Tony Hardy. Inside his flat, the cement floors, walls and doors were painted with graffiti. The second bedroom, where the body had been found before, was once again closed and locked. Tony had wedged a grey set of tracksuit bottoms into the gap underneath the door. Investigators soon realised that the tracksuit was there to keep the smell of decomposition from escaping. On the floor of the bedroom, investigators found a large black plastic garbage bag wrapped in twine. Inside the bag was dismembered a female torso. A hacksaw and 3 knives had been arranged neatly on the top of the bag. There were still chunks of remains on the hacksaw blade. Police also found rubber gloves and an electric saw. There were also evidence that someone had taken photos at the scene. Though it was obvious that he had dismembered the bodies there, police still used luminol to document the presence of human blood. Luminol, in case you don't know, is a chemical that, when sprayed upon a surface, will react with hemoglobin, which is in our blood, and it causes it to glow. Even if you have bleached the complete area and scrubbed it down and everything, it will still detect traces of blood. So when police sprayed the luminol, Tony's entire apartment lit up like a Christmas tree, particularly around the bathtub. My eyes are watering because this is just absolutely grim. But this will explain why, if you are doing these heinous acts in your bathroom, you're hardly gonna want to sit in the bath and chill, are you? So, hence the nickname Stenchy or Stinky. Oh my goodness, this is disgusting. 51-year-old Tony Hardy always said he would be famous, and now he was. Police alerted the media that they were looking for him. They distributed photos and a description. The media dubbed Tony Hardy as the Camden Ripper. When questioning neighbours, many recalled hearing sounds of an electric saw and the smell of incense coming from Tony's apartment. But at the time they dismissed it, thinking their crazy neighbour was doing construction work in the middle of the night. Tony was on the run, but he didn't venture very far. Police received several reports that people had seen him around the Camden area, doing very little to disguise his appearance. Inside his flat they found his diabetes, bipolar and manic depression medications. Tony needed 7 different kinds of medication, and they knew he couldn't survive for long without it, so they alerted the nearby hospitals to be on the lookout for him. Detectives then sifted through hours of security camera footage from the Camden area. On several cameras throughout the city, they could see Tony opening dumpsters and casually throwing bags in. In some videos, Tony would look directly into the camera as if he believed it was impossible for him to get caught. Investigators also found that Tony regularly used a loyalty card at the local Sainsbury's grocery store. The security cameras from his local store showed him using his loyalty card when buying the garbage bags that were used to dispose of the body parts. On January the 2nd, 2003, an off-duty police officer spotted Anthony Hardy at the Great Ormond Street Hospital. When Tony realised someone had spotted him, he ran. 2 police officers gave chase and caught up with him, but Tony was a very large man and fought back. He stabbed one officer in the hand and punched him, dislodging an eye from its socket. He punched a second officer and knocked him out completely. They called more police in to help, who pinned him down and apprehended him. During the analysis of the female torso that had been found on the floor in the bedroom, they found that the victim had both breast and butt implants. Using the serial number on the butt implant, investigators identified her as 29-year-old Elizabeth Vlad. On January the 3rd, using DNA, police were able to identify the second victim as Bridget McLennan. Bridget was a 34-year-old mother of two who was also a habitual drug user and a prostitute who worked on the streets near King Cross Station. Detectives interrogated Tony Hardy for 72 hours, but he was defiant and said nothing other than no comment. It was clear from items in the bedroom that Tony had taken photos of the killings, but they had no idea where the photos were, and Tony wasn't about to tell them. A few weeks after his arrest, a nearby photo processing centre alerted police that they had 2 rolls of film that Tony had dropped off for processing. Can you imagine that? Oh my God. Tony had told the processing centre that it was pornographic with consenting adults, but the photos clearly were more than that. Pathologists confirmed that the victims in the photos were dead when the photos were taken. In over 40 photos, Tony had covered the victim's face with the Red Devil mask and his New York Yankees baseball hat. The same hat he had been seen wearing in several of the security camera videos, and on the day he was arrested. He had posed the bodies in pornographic poses with crucifixes and the dildo. Before the trial, Tony refused to answer any questions at all. The only question he answered was where he had put the heads and hands of the girls. His reply was that he was too drunk and he couldn't remember where he dumped them. Tony pleaded not guilty and was due to stand trial in November 2003 at the Old Bailey Central Criminal Court in London. The witnesses were prepped and the evidence was ready to present to the court. Then, on the first day of the trial, Tony suddenly changed his plea to guilty to all 3 counts of murder. Anthony Hardy was given 3 life sentences, 1 for each life he took. Although it is speculated that he may have killed more, the hands and heads of Elizabeth Vlad and Bridget McLennan were never found. At his sentencing, the judge told Tony, quote, "Only you know for sure how your victims met their deaths, but the unspeakable indignities to which you subjected the bodies of your last 2 victims in order to satisfy your depraved and perverted needs are in no doubt." End quote. Pathologist Freddie Patel, do you remember him? He determined that Sally Rose died of natural causes. Freddie Patel was in the news again in 2009. During the G20 summit in London, thousands of protesters gathered in the city centre while police set up roadblocks to control the crowds. An innocent newspaper vendor and father of 9, Ian Tomlinson. He was not a protester, but was trying to make his way home that evening and police mistook him for a protester. He was bitten on the leg by a police dog, hit on the back of the legs with a baton and shoved to the ground by a police officer. He later died from an injury he sustained during the fall. Freddie was the first, Freddie being the one that said, we know Freddie now, the ME. He was the first to examine the body of Ian Tomlinson. His findings from that examination mistakenly determined that Tomlinson died of a heart attack. Subsequent examinations determined that Tomlinson died from internal bleeding from the injuries inflicted by police. An inquest jury found that Tomlinson had been unlawfully killed. Freddie Patel was charged with 68 failings of the examination. Among those was the fact that he had failed to include information about the internal bleeding. Patel was found to be, quote, misleading, dishonest, and liable to bring his profession into disrepute, end quote. He was also found to be irresponsible with the post-mortem examination of Sally Rose White. In 2012, Freddie Patel was taken off the medical registry for those failures and failures found on 3 additional post-mortem examinations. In 2005, through letters written to his friends from his cell at Wakefield Prison in Yorkshire, Anthony Hardy professed that he prays for his own forgiveness and was, quote, finding God and had rediscovered Catholicism. A quote from him: I have prayed for forgiveness virtually every day for the past year since my brother died in a car accident in Australia aged 60 on January the 2nd, 2003. God has taken him to be with other members of my family. The chaplain of the prison gave me the news and we prayed together about Terry, his brother, and myself. End quote. In another letter, Tony wrote, Elaine, his lawyer, brought me the news that Harold Shipman had hanged himself on Monday night. I wonder if he redeemed himself before he died. I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes me shall live, even though he dies, said the Lord. John 11:25. Shipman didn't adhere to his Hippocratic oath, so I leave his fate to the Almighty. Amen. He continued, I went to Rampton Hospital between April and July 2003 for assessment and met another wonderful chaplain and went to services when staff allowed me. I wanted to join the choir, but circumstances and my return have prevented it. End quote. Despite his newfound religion, prison authorities reprimanded Tony for trying to write the number 666 into his date of birth. Quote, the authorities think I'm behaving badly rather than being ill. I've lost all my correspondence due to a flood of biblical proportions, which I caused in my cell. There's a verse in the Bible which says, and wash away all your... And that's what I did in the flood. The staff were not so forgiving. I've become a Catholic since moving to Wakefield, but they have no Catholic priest to hear my confession, instruct me or help me atone for my sins. So I'm in limbo until September, when a priest will be appointed. I'm going to ask Elaine, the lawyer, to write to my ex-wife and tell her about my rediscovered faith and assure her that she is now safe. I don't expect I will ever be released from prison. I'd like to know how many grandchildren I have. I expect there are several. It's lovely to have someone to write to who is my intellectual equal. There are many asylum seekers in Belmarsh and people who have been persecuted for their beliefs. Several are friends of mine, and of course I have Christian friends from all parts of the world. Very few have had the benefit of an excellent education, though. I do art here, which I find very satisfying. I'm in my Anthony van Dyck phase now. I have his type of beard, but my favourite artist is Salvador Dali. I've become a vegan. Can you put me in touch with the Vegan Society? The prison can't, even though they provide a vegan diet. I'm trying to lose weight by not eating fat in meat and dairy products. I can't get to education either, high security category, so I write short stories for my own amusement and read psychology, science and literature when I can. I have been to the gym here and in Rampton, where I played volleyball quite successfully. Rampton had a pool, so when I dived in, the water dived out. Seriously, they had good music. They had a good music system at the pool, so I had a good 1 hour session a week. I'm waiting to be given a tariff by the judge, which could take months. There are 700 lifer cases waiting to be dealt with. End quote. In 2012, Anthony Hardy's sentence was given a whole life tariff, meaning he will never be released from prison. A very rare sentence in the UK. And there you go. Anthony Hardy. Hard to hear in a lot of places, I know. My heart goes out to the families of the victims, as it always does in my true crime. And yeah, oh my goodness me. Absolutely despicable. And discussing all of those quotes where he had sent letters to people and all of those, I don't buy it for a minute. I think he's still trying to manipulate the system by finding God when your parole comes around. I found God now, I'm a good person now. Oh, okay, you can leave. That's not happening. That's not happening, which is very, very rare in the UK. I'm torn because the American justice system, it has its flaws, of course it does. But they are very, very harsh on people like this. I think they're very harsh on any criminal case, really. You can do a very long prison term in America. Whereas here, you can commit murder and still have the possibility of parole roll around. Obviously, in his case, he's very one sick, depraved individual, and I don't buy that. He obviously has a mental health issues, but I don't buy the well, send me to a mental health hospital instead. Oh, okay then, because you're mentally ill. They failed a lot of times. They even brought attention to the fact that he was very, very dangerous, and he was still released. So, yeah, the system failed. He went on to kill even more people. But there you go, guys. Thank you so very much for spending time with me. This is a long episode. I don't know how long it is, but yeah, thank you so much for spending time with me, and let me know your thoughts down below. Yeah, I love hearing from you all in the comments section. I really do appreciate you tuning in to my true crime. If you could please give me a thumbs up and yeah, all that good stuff. I really do appreciate it. It just helps in the YouTube algorithms and all that fun stuff, you know. Okay, so I'm just jumping in here because I've found some extra information as well as an update on the end. So the extra information, as if this wasn't bad enough, it was originally reported that the police believed that Tony was possibly connected to the unsolved cases of 2 sex workers found dismembered and dumped in the River Thames, and up to 5 or 6 other murders that bore marked similarities to the ones for which he was convicted, but there was not enough evidence available directly to implicate him. One of the murders he was originally linked to was that of London sex worker Paula Fields, whose body was dumped in the Thames in 2001. That was in fact solved in 2011 when John Sweeney was convicted of her murder. I touched on that earlier. He was known as the Canal Killer, and John Sweeney is obviously someone we need to look into at a later date. Zoe Parker. The other Thames sex worker murder that was linked to Tony was that of Zoe Parker, who had last been seen in Hounslow in December 2000 before her dismembered torso was found in the river. Possible links between Tony and Zoe were noted in the press as soon as he was apprehended in January 2003, with detectives saying that, quote, he is a suspect for the unsolved murders of any women whose bodies have been cut up and dumped, end quote. The lower half of Zoe's body was never found. Investigators were of the opinion that the body had been cut with something sharp, like a samurai sword. Zoe's incomplete body had been found on the 17th of December in 2000, 11 days after she disappeared. The torso was found next to Chelsea Harbour on the Thames. She was 24 years old and also known as Kathy Dennis. She travelled around West London seeking clients, moving between Isleworth, Feltham, Hounslow and sometimes the West End. And on the night she disappeared, she was in Hounslow. She was said to have often started up conversations with strangers. On the night she went missing, she was seen with 2 men described as white with dark hair. One was wearing a white casual jacket, dark trousers and white trainers. The other man was stocky and wearing dark clothing. Investigators also asked for a woman named Carmen or Carmel to come forward, as they believed she had information on the murder, saying she was apparently a friend of Zoe's and came from the Hounslow or Isleworth area. 2 of the murders linked to Tony occurred in Nottinghamshire, near where Tony grew up on Burton-on-Trent. I have no doubt whatsoever that there are more and more and more out there. I think, as with anyone, I mean, he tried to kill his wife with a bottle of ice, essentially, and because he thought it would melt away all the evidence. I mean, you know, and for it not to be treated as a serious attempted murder, really, domestic violence. But there you go. Now, the other update I have is that Tony has since passed away. He was 69 and he died of pneumonia, and it was kind of linked to COVID on the 25th of November in 2020. I thought it might be ironic that our good old friend Freddie Patel might be able to say that he died of a heart attack, but no, he did pass away, since, and I found that out, so I thought I would add that on the end of this video, because I know some of you do like that nice little ribbon on the end of the true crime to know that justice was served, for one, and he passed away in prison, 69. I mean, yeah, but there you go. Thank you for joining me for today's episode. It is a long one. It's a very, very brutal one. And as always, my heart and my thoughts go with the victims' families, as always, in my true crime. You know, it's very, very tragic. They were very young women and, just happened to cross paths with this awful person, and it's all very, very sad. So my heart and my thought goes to the victims' families, and they are not forgotten. Thank you for joining me. I hope you got a lot of your diamond painting done, and I will see you next time. As always, if you have any suggestions on who you would like me to talk about next, comment section is there for you, and I hope you have a good week, and I will be seeing you next time for more true crime story time. And remember, stay safe out there. Bye.